Manny here once again. Welcome to DFS Zone, your source for daily fantasy sport lineup advice for the NFL and the NBA. Got a brand new video for you guys. Week 6 of the NFL. We're going to discuss some game stacks this week. I'm going to target 2 games that I'm going to discuss. This is more so for NFL DFS players that are fairly new, don't understand more or less how to go about game stacking. Giving you a couple of last week. If you've seen my video, I gave you a couple little tips there. Going to go over the same tips this week, and then of course show you on how you can gauge and look at a game and say to yourself, man, I don't really need to do a whole lot of research, and I'm going to show you how you can just do the little basic research that you need and be able to find value in some other competitive games that are going to have decent implied totals and decent spreads, because those are the games you're looking for to get those value plays that you need to make sure you fill out your lineups. But before I get started, appreciate you guys drop a like on the video. If you're new to the community and you have not subscribed as of yet, that little red button down below there on your right hand corner of your screen here on YouTube, click on that, and on the right hand side of that is the bell icon. Make sure that you click that on, and make sure, because when you click that on, you're gonna automatically be notified of all NFL and NBA videos that I post, as well as live shows. I conduct a live show for the NFL every Saturday night, which happens to be tomorrow at 7 p.m. and we run that. I pretty much run that to about 8:30 every single Saturday. We go over the entire slate, over the plays that I suggested and recommended to the community during the week, as well as we interact, we feed off each other, we learn from one another, and of course I answer as many questions as I get. I usually answer everybody's questions, so the more I get, the more I try to answer and try to help others out. So again, a great community. Make sure you're a part of it. I also will have those live shows during the NBA season as well, at least 3, I would say minimum, but the max maybe 4 times a week, 1 hour before lock every single week for the NBA as well. So make sure you subscribe, put on your post notifications, so this way you don't miss out on any of that information and content. All right, game stacking. Like I said last week, the first thing you should definitely look at as a newbie in NFL DFS is definitely look at implied totals. Go to the Vegas odds, look at the entire slate, make sure you jot down the top 3, 4, 5 games that you think are the most appealing with the high implied totals, that the spreads are not more than 5. Very important. At least that's, in my opinion, that's pretty much for me. I normally don't go anywhere over 5 unless I feel that there is a possibility that there is that opponent is going to have a chance to maybe, just maybe, beat the spread, or has a chance to actually win the game. You know, so and that's usually not that many games that I find that in, but 5 or more, 5 or less. So 1 point spread, 2 points. So again, the 2 games I'm going to discuss today, I'm going to show you how you can just basically gauge those games. So the first game we're going to discuss is Tampa Bay and Atlanta. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be targeting these players. Again, people are going to start talking about, I know a lot of players are going to be highly owned if they're targeted enough. I don't think highly owned. For me, highly owned is in a large slate like this, 12-game slate, is more like 30-35%. And even then, I think I've seen plenty of people win with players, with 2 or 3 players in their lineup at 25, 30, 35% and still win a GPP and win thousands of dollars. So for me, chalk is like 60, 70%, 50%. In a large slate like this, I just don't see it happening. But there will be some guys that are going to be highly targeted, and I say highly, for me, it's about 30-35%, and I still think with that you could still build a nice lineup. So I'm not concerned whatsoever. So a 12-game slate, got plenty of options, guys. There's people that win the top spot, and the person who finished second and third has like half a different team. So it definitely does happen. All right, so the game I'm going to talk about, Tampa Bay and Atlanta. Now, bear with me, because, again, this is to target and to help those that are fairly new. So the video is not going to be for everybody. I don't want nobody coming out, being disappointed, or it's just really to help those. I want to be more of a not only informative type of a channel, but also try to help people out, because I've been there. But I've been doing fantasy sports, at least on Fanduel and Draftkings, for 3.5 years. This is my 4th year for football. But let's get back to the game. All right, Tampa Bay, Atlanta. we're going to look at this game because the implied totals, like I said, you look at the high implied totals. If there's a good matchup, spread is under 5, definitely jot them down. Same thing all the way through the whole entire slate. If you got 3 or 4 of them like that, now we got to find how we're going to narrow them down. I've narrowed these down already. I really think these are the best 2. So we're going to discuss Tampa Bay and Atlanta. And when you think about Tampa Bay and Atlanta, implied totals in this game as of this moment is 57.5, with Atlanta favored at home by 3.5. Another thing that I also look at is the game meaningful for some teams? We have 2 teams here. They only have 2 wins and 1 win. And one team like Atlanta can't afford to go to 1-5. I think they're 1-4. And and Tampa Bay just came off a bye. They don't want to come in and actually lose in their first game after a bye. And if they win, they'll go to 3-2 and put Atlanta with 1 nail on the coffin, pretty much, so to speak. So that is big. So this is a big game, and it's more of a big game, absolutely, for Atlanta. So, and the beauty of it is I love the fact that they're home. So that's another thing. Atlanta plays very good football at home. Even when they lose, they're there. They usually are right there within 3 points or 2 points or 5 points. I never hardly see them get blown out in their home field. So 57.5 implied totals. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at Tampa Bay. We're going to look at Tampa Bay's passing offense and Tampa Bay's passing offense as far as net yards. Now, I don't look at the net yards. I look at yards per game. All right, and the first thing that I'm going to say is this is the basic statistics that you can look at. Go right into ESPN or NFL.com and you go right over to the statistics. Simple as that. You don't need to use RotoWire. You don't need to use one of your optimizer services like Fantasy Labs or anything like that. Because if you are a fan of the sport, and let's say you watch sports or you watch football like I do, and as I know there's tons of football fans that have the Sunday ticket as well, and they watch and max out those the channels with the 4 games at one time, and then you also have the channel that gives you the 8 games at one time, and that's what I basically am watching. I'm not watching one game at one time unless it's really intriguing. I'll tap into a game and spend 4 or 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes watching it. But again, that's what you need to do. And if you have a general idea and you already have gotten after 5 weeks of the season, everybody should have an idea by now on who are the better offenses and who are the better defenses and the weaker defenses. And when you look at this game, you already know both teams are explosive with their offense, capable of putting up points, but their defense definitely have vulnerability. So you do this. You jot all this stuff down and you look at ESPN.com or NFL.com, are my favorite 2, to get just the basic statistics. That's the key here today. It's just using basics, because for me, this is the only thing I need to look at to make a decision if I want to be able to have any exposure to this game as far as players and making it into a game stack in one of my lineups. All right. So Tampa Bay 14th in pass offense, and that's in net yards. 363 yards per game is what I look at. After 4 games, that is still number 1 in the NFL. That is going to definitely drop a little bit after the 5th game because they're playing this weekend. But at the moment, 363 is pretty high, and that's still after only 4 games. So they are done very well. We know they can pass the ball. We know they have weapons. 10.1 yards per catch is 2nd in the NFL, so that's pretty good. Again, that's going to definitely come down after this game depending on what they produce this coming week. Then we go and we look now on the opposite side of the end. We look to see where does Atlanta fit in this pass defense. Well, Atlanta's 22nd in pass defense as far as net yards allowed. But again, I focus on the yards, and I think that's what everybody should focus on. Go on the yards, click on that, and make sure that situates itself and shows you more or less where they're at. So they have allowed 277 yards per game. That's 23rd in the NFL, and they've coughed up 12 touchdowns. Then you go and you look back at the offense. They have produced 12 TDs thus far already and are passing at a 360 clip, while this defense has been holding teams down to 277. All right. Nonetheless, we know that there is the possibility that maybe Atlanta could neutralize Tampa Bay a little bit. I don't think a whole lot. And then we also see that because of the 360 yards per game, that it's definitely a possibility for Tampa Bay to do very well against Atlanta. So the numbers do speak that there is at least a chance here. So when you start saying to yourself, well, all right, now let's look at fantasy points. And that's the second tip I can give you. After that, we're basically looking at where they stand as far as fantasy points, as far as quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. In this game, because both teams are vulnerable as far as having no major weapon at running back, Tampa Bay doesn't have a running game. They're 69.5 yards per game, is dead last in the NFL, so I'm not even concerned. Nobody in their backfield scares me. Then again, like I say here numerous times, any given Sunday, anything can happen. I mean, Barber can come up here and light Atlanta up, for 100 and something yards rushing. Who knows? anything can happen. But obviously the numbers are telling us we're not going to be concerned with Tampa Bay's running game. And then we know now that just a while ago, a couple hours ago, I got the alert, the notification that Mr. Freeman is going to be out. So T. Coleman is going to be obviously getting the brunt of the snaps and the carries for Atlanta. So I'm not too scared about dealing with Mr. Coleman. I think this game is going to be basically the passing game is going to obviously be the dictating factor here on what really happens in this game. So then we look at the quarterback. Fantasy points per game, 27.2 DK, 25.3 Fanduel. That's third most in the NFL for the Atlanta Falcons against the opposition. Then we go at wide receiver, a big area, fifth most in the NFL, coughing up 45.2 and 36.5 on Fanduel. Versus tight ends, that's the one area that they have been at least solid. That's the 10th fewest. They have the 10th fewest fantasy points allowed to tight ends, 10.4 and 8.1. Then we go to running back, third most in the NFL. But again, we have nothing to worry about here. But again, anything can happen. We don't know. They are vulnerable there. It's showing that they have given up fantasy points to running backs. But we have to look at whom. At that point, you got to look at whom they have played. And Atlanta has played some pretty good teams. They had to deal with Connor, Bernard, Kamara, McCaffrey, Ajayi before he got hurt, and Clement. Again, let's think about this one. When Atlanta has faced a lot of good teams in their first 4 or 5 games of the year, they had to play Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, New Orleans, Carolina, Philadelphia. That has something to do with it as well. So they've given up a ton of running back fantasy points. They don't have to worry about that with Tampa Bay. See, that's why I wanted to be able to show you these things. Very basic stuff. You don't have to go crazy. You don't have to go out and get a membership for something right away or anything like that. I do a very extensive research depending on the games. But something like this game, everything is right here on basic stats. So utilize those websites, ESPN and NFL.com. All right. When you combine all this, DK points 119.2. So, I mean, granted, any given Sunday, that is not going to be the case. I don't expect that to be 119 all the time. To this weekend, maybe just 100 fantasy points given up to those positions by Atlanta to Tampa Bay. Or it may be, they may exceed it. It may be more than 119. But at least if you're getting 100 out of 4 or 5 players in a game stack, and if you get 120 to 125, 130 out of 6, you're pretty much 2/3 of the way of getting to 200. And 200 is pretty much, in football, is pretty much the goal if you want to at least be in the running for a GPP, for a major tournament. All right, guys? So that's where we stand there. So that's basically the bottom line. That's what you're looking for. So fantasy points, get the basic stats pertaining to offense and defense as far as per catch and per game. See where the defense stands as far as what they are allowing to the opposition, and as far as touchdowns and all that, and then look at the fantasy points. So now we know that we could target this game. Who we're going to target? Well, you have to make at least 2 lineups because you got to definitely have exposure to Matt Ryan, and then you got to have one lineup where you have to have exposure in a team stack of Jameis Winston. So let's say you go Jameis Winston, you go Mike Evans, and you go Mr. Jackson or Mr. Braid if you want to save money, whatever it may be. Make sure you lock in 3 Tampa Bay guys. Come on the other side. If you could fill out the rest of your lineup with 2 or maybe 3 Atlanta guys, now you say to yourself, well, I got about 40, I got about 5,000 to about 58 or maybe even 6,000 left over after you get your defense. Now you go and you get a cheap defense and take a stab at it with a cheap defense. Plain and simple, there has possible upside of, and then when you look at defense, I would say go with a team that has decent giveaway takeaways and maybe has a little bit, definitely has a little pressure on the quarterback and has put themselves in position to get, the occasional interception and the 1 or 2 sacks a game. Those are the fantasy points you want to get out of a defense. You don't necessarily have to go with Chicago this week. You don't necessarily have to go with Baltimore if you do a game stack of Tampa Bay and Atlanta and you want to get 5 of those guys in there. And again, back to the game stack. 4 players, 2 on each side, or as maximum of 6 is what I normally would recommend to anybody, and that's what I normally do. If I'm stacking a game, I'm either looking 4 or 5 players, and the most I would go is 6 out of that game, and then the numbers have to look right. So if you have 5 players, now you say to yourself, where do I go from here? I got this game stack, I got some solid plays here, I got 5 guys, I got 55 to almost 5,900 per player left. You get that defense, all of a sudden now you got about 6,000 to 6,200 left. Now you go and you target games that have some meaning, of course, that are going to be decent implied totals, and they're going to be competitive. Now, the game like this, because we didn't target any running backs, we got to look for those games that have some good running backs. And with 6,000, 6,200 left, more than likely, maybe as high as 6,500 per player, you could target a few games. You could target, for instance, one of my players this week, like Seattle at Oakland. Granted, this game is in London, but it should be fine over there. You can definitely make an exception and get Chris Carson. You don't want Chris Carson, go over here to the Chicago-Miami game. The Chicago-Miami game right now is 44 implied total with Chicago favored by 2.5. That's the kind of numbers I'm looking for. A close game, a game that's going to be in the low 20s. And then now you look for players that can definitely fill in and have value, that are going to be an integral part of the offense going into the game. Like, that they're going to get targets or they're going to get carries. So you can go over here and you can take Mr. Cohen at 5,900. Now you got yourself Mr. Carson and Mr. Cohen. Now you can go and get someone at tight end. And even the same thing. I should have just told you plain and simple. Pay down on defense. Get someone that can possibly get you some fantasy points. And then at tight end, same thing. You don't have to pay up at tight end this week. Go and get someone reasonable price. You got Vance McDonald at 4,600. He's going to get some touches. You got Ryan Griffin for Houston. He's going to get some touches. He's questionable. You got Cameron Brate in the same matchup. You can go with him and load up with another Tampa Bay player. There's some plays. There's some players here that you could come down to, and now you free up even a little bit more value in some of those areas for that flex play and for that other receiver that you're looking for those two running backs. All right? So that's what I'm looking at. That's what you gauge it. So you got, again, you could target these games. The Jets game versus Indianapolis, perfect game to target. 45 implied total. The Jets are favored by 3. You got the Chicago-Miami, like I said, 44 implied total. Chicago favored by 2.5. You got Seattle at Oakland in London, 48.5 implied total. Seattle favored by 2.5. You got the Jacksonville-Dallas game, 41 implied total. Jacksonville favored by 3. And, and then I think even the Chargers-Cleveland game, that has a very good implied total, and the game is fairly close as well, too. So you got some areas. You got some games that are going to be good games, good spreads. Games are going to be fairly close, and games that you're going to be able to get some good players. Now, let's go to the other game, because on this other game here, we're going to get the running backs out of this game. I definitely feel that you should. Pittsburgh-Cincinnati. Implied total for Pittsburgh-Cincinnati at the moment is 51.5. Cincinnati favored by by 1.5 points. This is going to be a nail biter. It's going to be a close game. This is another game that is a very good game because this game is meaningful. Like I said during my videos early in the week, Cincinnati wants to win. This is an arch rival for them, man. Since Ohio and Pennsylvania don't like each other when it comes to football. These are two big football states where high school football, college football is very, very big. And when it comes to the football, professional football, Cincinnati, Ohio people really want to trounce on the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania people. Plain and simple. Okay, and vice versa. So, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati is the next one I'm going to discuss. Implied totals, 51.5. Cincinnati favored by 1.5. Big game for both teams. Pittsburgh wants to get back in the running here in the division. Cincinnati wants to put at least one nail in the coffin on Pittsburgh. If Cincinnati wins this game, they're going to be 5-1. They're going to put Pittsburgh at 2-3-1. They're going to fall literally 3 games in the win column behind Cincinnati with 1 game only left head-to-head versus Cincinnati. And I think that's going to be really a tough situation for Pittsburgh to come back from. So, big game. And like I said already, man, both of these states, they are very big on football. Cincinnati, Ohio really wants to win this game, and as well as Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So a lot of pride, a lot of stuff going on here in this game. These teams definitely want to win. So this is going to be a great game. I think it's probably going to be the best game of the day. And I'm going to have some exposure to it. So again, the breakdown real quickly, basic statistics. Pittsburgh's offense, pass offense is 3rd in the NFL in net yards. Again, I want you to focus more on the yards per game. 321 yards per game. Therefore, that's 4th best in the NFL, and 11 TDs, which is tied with Minnesota and New Orleans for 2nd best as far as TDs are concerned. 7.7 yards per catch, which is 10th in the NFL. We go to Cincinnati. As far as defending the pass, they're 21st in net yards allowed, 277 yards per game given up, allowing to the opposition, 22nd in the NFL with 10 TDs. They are only allowing 7 yards per catch, which is 9th least amount in the NFL. So that's pretty darn good. They're giving up some passes, but they're not giving the big one up. So it's going to be interesting how this pans out. Then we look at the rushing game. In this game, I'm going to definitely concentrate on the rushing game because I really do like and I really do believe that both James Conner and Joe Mixon definitely need to be very, very much involved in this game to have success for either team. So I really like both of them in this game. And as you know, from my running back video, I gave you Mr. James Conner. And I said that it was very important that Pittsburgh gets him going first between the tackles and then obviously opening up the doors to get him involved in the pass game. And especially if they get ahead. And I think it's the same thing here. If Cincinnati gets ahead, it's going to be a lot easier for them to really keep themselves in position to keep feeding Mr. Joe Mixon from the backfield, let him run between the tackles for a little while, and at the same time open up the doors for the play action and so on and so forth. So getting back to the pass defense, so getting back now to the rushing offense. Rushing offense for Pittsburgh, they are 28th in the NFL, 84 yards per game. They are averaging 3.8 yards per rush, which is 25th in the NFL. Now, granted, James Conner, 2 games really didn't do a whole lot, obviously due to the fact that Pittsburgh fell behind and had to play from behind. So I had to play catch up, and that ended up just being more of a passing game, and that he was not too much involved in those games. So that definitely hurt Pittsburgh's overall as far as where they stand in the running game. But I think after last week, I think they know that they should definitely be utilizing James Conner. Cincinnati defending the rush, 23rd in the NFL as far as net yards allowed, 118.2 yards per game is the 10th most in the NFL. So they've been coughing up quite a bit of yardage, 4.5 yards per rush allowed. That's the 9th most in the NFL. So they have some vulnerability there. And when we see that, we automatically, like I saw already, before I did the video earlier in the week, I looked at that and I saw obviously that there was an opportunity for James Conner to possibly have some success here. So now we look at the fantasy points on the offensive end. Cincinnati's pass defense, Cincinnati's fantasy points allowed. Quarterbacks, 7th most in the NFL, 24 fantasy DK points, 21.8 Fanduel points, giving up 11 touchdowns to quarterbacks. As far as fantasy points to running backs, they're 11th in the NFL, 28 DK points, 24 Fanduel points, giving up 4 touchdowns, 2 of them rushing, 2 of them receiving. So we know that they've had the issues in the backfield with dual threat backs. Again, another check mark telling us that maybe James Conner is in a good spot. With the receivers, they've given up 12th most fantasy points per game at 40.7 and 32.2 respectively between the 2 platforms, 5 TDs. So out of the 11 TDs through the quarterback, 5 of them have come to wide receivers. The tight ends are 9th, 14.7 and 11.7 fantasy points, 3 TDs thus far this year. When you look at the total points, if you look at it on DK, it's 107, and on FanDuel is 97. So granted, give or take almost 100 fantasy points on both platforms. Again, like I said, for the last game, doesn't mean that we're going to get 107. Obviously, there's more fantasy points that we can actually target in the Tampa Bay Atlanta game because of their defense is being a little more vulnerable against the pass. But these guys are definitely all in play. There's a lot of guys. Now we're going to start thinking about, all right, whom can we target in what areas and what positions? Well, we know that we can target the offenses on both sides as far as passing, and as far as running, it seems like we can definitely attack those areas as well, you know. So now we go to the other side of the ball. So now we have some vulnerability. We know we can target Cincinnati in the pass defense a little bit, and as well as in the run game. So we know James Conner is in play. We know we can definitely look at, obviously, Ben Roethlisberger is in play. We definitely like the factors that we can use AB, and we can also use Juju. And then you can also look at the tight ends. There's been some vulnerability there as well. So VMAC as well as JJ is in play. Now we look at the other side of the ball, and let's check to see what Cincinnati has to offer. Well, Cincinnati's passing offense is 16th in the NFL in net yards. They're putting up 272 yards per game. That's 15th in the NFL, and they have 12 touchdowns, which is tied for 3rd most in the NFL. 7.7 yards per catch, which is the 11th in the NFL. Then we go and look and see where Pittsburgh is at as far as defending. Well, Pittsburgh is 29th in pass defense and net yards allowed this year. They have allowed 296 yards per game to the opponents, fourth most in the NFL. 13 TDs, which is tied for the most in the NFL with Tampa Bay. 7.8 yards per catch, which is 10th most in the NFL. So now we know we got a team that is 11th in yards per catch, and we have a team that is 10th most in the NFL in yards given up per catch. So obviously we know that Pittsburgh is vulnerable to the pass as well. So now we know we can gauge and we can focus on Andy Dalton as well as doing a team stack with Dalton. You can throw in there Mr. Boyd or possibly Mr. Green. Now we look at the rushing offense for Cincinnati, 23rd in the NFL in net yards, 95.4 yards per game. That's 23rd in the NFL. Only have 4 TDs, but remember the most important thing, they have missed their best running back, Joe Mixon, for about 2.5 of the games this year. So obviously that's one of the reasons why they're 23rd in rushing. I think within the next 4, by the time the second quarter of the season is over, I really truly believe Joe Mixon is going to make a difference here, and this rushing game is going to be definitely ranked higher. 10th in yards per rush at 4.3 yards per carry. Then we got Pittsburgh defending against the run, 18th in running defense in net yards. They have allowing 105 yards per game and got a team that's averaging 95. 18th most in the league, which is not too bad. 3 touchdowns. They have allowed 4.1 yards per carry, and that's 15th least amount in the NFL. Fantasy points, Pittsburgh giving up to quarterbacks second most fantasy points per game, 28.2 DK points and 26.1 Fanduel points. The running backs, 4th fewest thus far this year. 16.8 and 14.7 was pretty impressive. But again, I want to point this out. Sometimes you have to look at this. When you see something like this, folks, you basically look to see whom they have played and whom those teams were and what running backs were involved. And the opponents they had Cleveland, Kansas City, Tampa Bay, Baltimore, and Atlanta. And obviously Atlanta did not, because they fell behind, did not have a running game at all last week. Baltimore, same situation. Really didn't give up any big points to Baltimore. As far as the run game, Tampa Bay didn't have anything at all. Kansas City was the only one that had Mr. Hunt, and he didn't do all that much that game. And then the only game that really they gave up maybe 100 yards combined was to Cleveland. So they really did well against certain teams because they didn't really see any strong running game. And I think that's a different story here with Mr. Mixon. So definitely going to be interesting to see. But fantasy point-wise, 4th fewest thus far this year. Wide receivers, they're 3rd most in fantasy points thus far this year, 47.8 and 38.1 respectively between the two platforms. At tight end, 2nd most fantasy points to tight ends thus far this year, 20.7 DK and 16.1 Fanduel. If you combine all these, it's about 113 fantasy points on DK, combining the positions, and 94.9 on Fanduel. Obviously, the numbers are greater in the Atlanta-Tampa Bay game. But I really like this game because I think it's a little more balanced out with both teams utilizing their dual threat backs and having some weapons also on the outside and even in the inside with the tight ends. More importantly, I think Pittsburgh has, in this case, the better tight ends, considering that Cincinnati has lost their best tight end in Tyler Eifert. But that's where I'm at with that. And this is what you do. So you say to yourself, oh, okay, now that we know the vulnerability here is both a little bit on the running game and more so on the passing game with the fantasy points that I just tallied and I gave you. So now as fantasy players, we look to see what we're going to do as far as filling up the rest of this lineup. So what are some of the games we could target that we can get out of this game? So when we think about Pittsburgh and Cincinnati, right away I'm thinking I'm going to utilize both of the backs. If I'm going to game stack this game, I'm definitely going to have some exposure to Connor and Mixon or both. So let's say we go both. Let's say we choose, we can make multiple lineups. We got to have a lineup and expose Big Ben in one, and we need to have one where we have at least a 3-team stack with Cincinnati players, and that has to include Andy Dalton. So let's say, for example, here we'll go Ben Roethlisberger. We'll throw in there James Conner. We throw in there Mixon. We throw in there Juju Smith instead of AB to just save a little bit, and we throw in there Mr. Green or Mr. Boyd. Now, if you go Boyd, you're going to save a little bit more. You're still going to get an integral part of the offense in both Juju. He's going to get targeted in this game as well as Mr. Boyd. You can go with one of the hot shots as well, either green or brown, or you can go both. But then you're going to be definitely taxed as far as where you're going to get some value at. But I say if you go with, let's say, Boyd and you go Juju Smith, all right, and you go and you get yourself a cheap defense. Again, like I mentioned before, a defense that's going to get you at least going to get an opportunity to be able to get some turnovers, be able to be maybe a defense that is facing one of the young kids like Minnesota, somebody that's cheaper than the cheapest one you can get that's going to be in a position to possibly give you at least a few fantasy points. You could get 5, 6, 7 fantasy points out of a team defense. That is good enough. Then you go and you pay down a little bit at tight end, and now you're going to open up the door. So what are some of the games you can target? Well, in this game here, if you're utilizing the 2 running backs, now you're looking to get value in at least that flex position, that wide receiver spot, or even a tight end spot. And the first game that comes to mind, getting players from that are going to be respectable, that are going to be good in value, is going to be the Indianapolis-New York Jet game. That game is at 45 implied totals with the Jets favored by 3. And I'm looking at this game. You can definitely get some good receivers out of this game at a good price. And these kids are going to be very much involved in the offense. And as you can see here, there's the first 3 right here. First 4, they're all in play. All under 6,000, 58 to 5,500. You got Grant, Anderson, Rogers, and Quincy Enunwa. You would figure Chester, Rogers would be definitely a good spot here for us to put in his lineup. He's going to get targeted, and he's got great value. And then you got Robbie Anderson, who is capable of lighting it up like he did last week. He's a big play guy. He's the speedster for the Jets. So you got 2 guys right there. If you didn't want to go that route, then you can target a game like Minnesota, Arizona, but simply for the Minnesota player. But I would go Seattle, Oakland, and you got a couple of plays in the Seattle-Oakland game. You can go and get some value here. You got Doug Bolden at 6,200. I know on DK he's cheaper. I think I got it right here. He is 5,300 on DK. You can come down to Jordy Nelson. He's going to get some He's going to get some targets. He's 5,600 here, and he's 4,900 on DK. So you got 2 guys there, Baldwin, Nelson, easily. You want to target another game? How about Jacksonville, Dallas? You got Cole at 5,700, Westbrook at 57, Moncrief at 5,700. I don't like any of the Cowboys receivers, but you can get at least one Jacksonville player here. And you got the Jacksonville players. You got Moncrief on DK for 4,400. You have Cole at 4,800, and you have Westbrook at 5K. So they actually are nicely priced here for sure at 57, 57, and 57. So that's another game. You could come over here in Minnesota and take some of these high-flowering little sneaky guys. You got Christian Kirk here for Arizona at 5,400. You got Robinson, who got 2 targets a couple of weeks ago, I think on a Thursday night, and got 2 touchdowns. 5,100. You got Treadwell, the speedster for Minnesota, at 5. So this, you can get some value somewhere. You could come here to the Miami-Chicago game. You got Tyler Gabriel at 5,600. You got Stills at 5,800. You got Albert Wilson, who has big play ability at 4,900. So I'm just trying to give you guys ideas, and this is a game you can target because the Chicago-Miami game, 44 implied total. Chicago 2.5-point favorites. So these guys are going to have to be a very big part of this game. They're going to get some touches. They're going to be very much a part of the offense. They're going to be needed, and that's how you're going to be able to fill up your lineups. So, I mean, those are the 2 games that I'm targeting. I hope this helps. It just more so is more educational, just to show you that you can put up a lineup without having to go through a whole lot of research. Again, you can always come here at DFS Zone and get my advice, and I'll give you the insight because I do look at other things. But these particular 2 games here in this slate, hands down, that's all I needed to do to get an idea and say, hey, you know what? There's definitely room here to do a game stack, and I can find value in other areas like this. Look at the simple basic statistics like this that is very much free. You can get them on ESPN and on NFL.com, and you're done and over with. Look over the fantasy point totals, see where the teams are at as far as what they are allowing to the opposition, and you're on your way. All right, guys, I hope this helps. I hope you liked the video. Please drop a like. Again, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And make sure you put on that bell icon so this way you get those videos. As soon as I post anything up, you get that right away, that notification. I'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow, a live show, man. So definitely subscribe. Come down to the live show. Let's talk about the Sunday slate and discuss even some of this stuff if you want to. I'll be more than ready for it. All right, guys? See you then.